I'm on the dyno with Moog's S30 Fairlady Z, and I absolutely love this car. From the very beginning, I've always been a Datsun guy. Before I even had my license, I had a Datsun 1600. I've had L-series powered Datsuns. I've had CA powered 1600s. I've worked on plenty of the Z platform 240, 260, 280Z stuff. I absolutely love them. What the guys have done to this car is absolutely beautiful. And what I mean by that is it's got a late model drivetrain, it's got all the suspension, it's got the good brakes, but it's still a beautiful looking car, and they've really kept that purity of this thing, which I absolutely love. This is one of my all-time favorite cars. Now, I've been speaking to Blair about this car on and off for 12 months, and we're not quite sure exactly what we're going to do to try and satisfy him. Now, the problem is, Blair wants this as his weekend cruiser. He wants to be able to put someone in the passenger seat, go for a cruise down the coast, take it to the shops, do whatever, without being terrified of the power it's making. Now, keep in mind, the mighty RB26 engine, they do make huge horsepower. This thing with a decently sort of set up engine combination, 1,000 horsepower is not unreasonable anymore out of the 2.6 litre RB26 engine. Big turbocharger is where the problem starts. So this thing's got something like a GT35 turbocharger on it. It's a 2.6 litre engine, so you do need a bit of revs up before that turbocharger will start to come on boost and make the power. I've just done a dyno pull, and what you can see over here is that the thing only makes 50, 60, 70 kilowatts at the wheels until it comes on boost at around 5,000 RPM. And herein lies the problem. When it comes on boost, the thing is an absolute handful, and while the guys have put all the beautiful suspension, the massive brakes, all the good bushes, everything through this car, you've got to remember it still is an older car, and that sort of power, when you're using it on the weekend, it's not exactly what you want every time. So we need to come up with a solution to make this thing a perfect everyday driver as well as an animal on the street. Now, in order to fix some drivability problems and get this thing making more power down low, we don't have a huge amount of options. We could either change the turbocharger, the whole turbocharger assembly, or put a smaller rear housing on it, meaning that we're going to lose top end power, but we're going to pick up grunt down low where the car gets driven. In my opinion, on a car like this, good idea. Moog's with me. He's happy to lose a bit of top end power, so we might talk about a turbo change in the future. We could fit some vernier cam gears on the factory camshafts. That'll allow us to advance the inlet camshaft a little bit. And what that'll do is also pick up some low end power. Again, we would lose a little bit of top end, but we're happy to make that sacrifice. So both of these things involve mechanical changes, but what I'd like to try first is manipulating the electronic throttle that we're lucky enough to have on this car to see if I can pick up enough bottom end power in order to please Moog and make this thing a little bit nicer to drive. So the first thing we're going to do to try and make the drivability a little bit nicer is manipulate that relationship between the electronic throttle pedal and the electronic throttle body. So remembering, if you've got a cable style throttle, this relationship's already set for you because you've got a pedal that's already mounted in the car, a cable that goes out to the throttle body. But have a look at your throttle body. Remember that cable to pedal, it's not a one-to-one relationship, meaning that if you put the throttle down 50%, that doesn't necessarily mean that the throttle body itself is 50% open, because you've got that round thing on the side of the throttle body and we're pulling on the outside of that round shaft. So that means that we've got a curve in there that changes the relationship between how far you push the pedal down and how far the throttle body opens. If it's just a straight one-to-one, cars drive really, really strangely. And by that, I mean that I have configured cars to have a bit of a muck around before like this. So if you're driving down the highway with a one-to-one relationship of pedal versus throttle body, trying to maintain road speed at, say, down the highway, 60 miles or 100 kilometers an hour, you'll find that even the best driver will be 90, 110, 90, 110, because the idea of having that curve in there is so that you've got a bit of a dead spot in the pedal when you're making 20, 30 kilowatts or, something 40 or 50 horsepower at the wheels, where you're sort of keeping that consistent road speed. So it's really important to get this curve right. So in this car, what I'm going to try and do is move our pedal position to throttle position relationship in order to get the driver to think that they're just cruising along, but in actual fact, we're opening the throttle body more than you would expect. Again, this is one of those things that's a really, it's an unnatural feeling. If you have to put the throttle pedal 50% of the way down, in your mind, you think you're using half of the engine power, when in actual fact, if the turbocharger is this laggy, you kind of need to do that in order to make a bit of power and a bit of steam to keep on going. So in our software here, all I need to do is just move our pedal position to throttle position relationship so that now, as we're cruising down the highway, even though I'm resting my foot in the same position, the throttle blade will be more open and it'll feel a lot more natural. The next thing I'm going to do is combat that aggressive boost curve. And that's not so much a relationship between the throttle body and the throttle pedal itself. Rather, that's the relationship between how wide open the throttle is, how much boost we've got, and how much engine RPM we have. So for somebody who knows what's about to happen and knows what this thing feels like when it's coming on boost, full throttle, let it rip, feels amazing and it's awesome. But if you want to maybe lend this car to a friend, or if a valet driver has it, or it's at the car wash or whatever the case, sometimes you don't want somebody to be able to have full throttle. So with the electronic throttle function, we can limit how much throttle blade opening there is, regardless of how much pedal position in the car there is. In order to do that, it's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to set up a different configuration for the throttle pedal. I'm going to set it up so that at the moment, driving as a normal car, if I put my foot flat, that means I can get 100% throttle opening and 100% engine power all the time. But in this case, I'm going to change this a little bit so that when I flick a switch or when I enable a valet mode, the throttle blade will only ever open to 50% in total, allowing a 50% airflow rather than 100%. I can also set up that same valet mode to limit the boost pressure, to lower the rev limit. The options are endless, but they're the things that I kind of set up for a valet mode or a lend to your mate mode. So I'm going to set that up now. We'll do another power run, make sure that it smooths off where that boost comes on, makes the car a little bit safer and a little bit nicer to drive if you don't have the skill to be driving a 40 or 50-year-old car with 420 horsepower. Now, at first glance, you might think it's crazy what we're trying to do here. We're at Haltech. We want to make the most power we can out of absolutely everything. And we still are, but we're also making this thing drivable. So as we cruise along here, you'll notice that I haven't manipulated the throttle body under 4,500 RPM. So under 4.5 grand, still makes exactly the same power, everything's identical. But as we come up through 5,000 and 6,000 RPM, have a look at that change. Let's get to say 6,000 just here. It can either be making 150 kilowatts at the wheels with a relatively flat torque curve and a relatively flat and linear power, or it could be making nearly 270 kilowatts and come on so aggressively that it pins you back in the seat, feels amazing, tires squeal, but not so amazing if you're just taking your missus out for dinner. Well, depends on what your missus likes, I guess, but I know that my wife would probably be more inclined to have this linear power and not feel like she's going to die. So we can do this with a simple on-off switch or a rotary trim dial or something like that that adjusts our throttle aggression in order to make the car super drivable. Also, like I said before, awesome if you're going to put it into like a valet or car wash or getting a wheel alignment, taking it to your mechanic, a whole bunch of different stuff, a whole bunch of different reasons why you might want to smooth out the power in this thing. Is it a Datsun or is it a Nissan debate? It's been going on for a couple of years now, and we're not really going to get into that here, but I do want to point out a couple of historical facts about the Nissan Datsun name. The Datsun name dates back to 1931. It was applied to all original, so not made under license cars produced by the parent company, Nissan. Nissan started phasing out the Datsun name in the mid-1980s, but briefly brought it back in 2013, only to phase it out again a few years later. So in Australia, during the 1980s, we actually had cars that were branded both Nissan and Datsun. Confusing, I know, right? Holy sh... Now, for you guys who have been following Mighty Car Mods on YouTube, you would certainly recognize this car as Blair's Fairlady Z. This is the car that they went over to Japan, they selected after Blair just fell in love with this shape, and he just thought, I have to have one in my garage. So off they went. They found this absolutely stellar condition, beautiful, beautiful car, grabbed it, brought it back to Australia. But being enthusiasts, it wasn't going to stay a dead original car. So the first thing that happened, the old L Series engine out, the mighty Nissan RB26 straight in. The controller down here, there's no AC button. Put the windows down, it's got these twisty, spinny things. The door handles are located in such a confusing position that if we ever actually needed to use the safety equipment, which is basically these seat belts that are into the roll cage, and that's about it, I would never be able to find that door handle to get out. No airbags, no passenger side airbags, no curtain airbags. Steering wheel is just a steering wheel. It's got one button. It's got a horn, nothing else. Hasn't got any adaptive cruise control, doesn't have any rain sensing wipers. We've just got a twisty knob. If it's raining, you turn them on. That's all there is to it. It's as raw as it gets, and I really do love it. I just, the smell of the Datsun, you can tell, you know, you really know that you're in a Datsun. The gauges along the front, we've got our clock, we've got an amp meter and the fuel gauge, which looks like it's struggling a little bit at the moment. Got a water temperature and oil pressure gauge. That's about it. There's nothing else there. The gauges up the top actually look, they're really familiar looking, because Datsun, Nissan sort of followed that all the way through the, through all of the different cars, up to the R34 that's got the MFD up the top. R32 and R33 have still got the 3 gauges, a little bit smaller. Things get a little bit more digitized, but this car feels just so cool to drive, really nice. So a little bit of trivia here. The bodywork of the S30 was designed by a fellow called Albert Goetz, who was actually responsible for the super famous BMW 507 Roadster as well. The original engine in the Fairlady was an L20, a 2-litre 6-cylinder single cam with twin Hitachi single barrel carburetors. In its factory form, this L20 made 92 kilowatts or 123 horsepower, which was actually the self-imposed limit for Japanese manufacturers back in the day. Now that's changed to 206 kilowatts as that sort of gentleman's agreement, but even then we know that that's been breaking from time to time. But we all know that's not the engine that's in this car, so let's take a look. Beyond both being descendants from Nissan or Datsun, they really don't share that much in common, and there's no remnants of L20 left in this engine bay. The guys are using a stock RB26, so it's a 2.6 litre, 6-cylinder twin cam engine. On the intake side, this engine normally would have had 6 throttles, so the ITB setup, and then a common plenum from the twin turbocharger setup. It's got a Bosch Motorsport electronic throttle through some nice clamps up to a Hypertune intercooler that's got billet and tanks that sits really nice in the front of the Datsun. Across here we've got our hot pipe that comes from the Garrett turbocharger. This is a GT 3576. It's got a 0.86 rear housing, and that's the reason why I think this car might be just a tiny bit laggy. So remembering the mighty RB26 makes 1,000 horsepower, all the good stuff in all the race cars, but be reasonable, it's only a 2.6 litre, and this is quite a large turbocharger. That's the reason why below sort of 4,000 or 5,000 RPM, It is a little bit laggy and it is a little bit tricky to drive in tight, narrow sections. So that's where we might be looking at this turbocharger. We might be trying to fit maybe a 0.6 size rear housing on it, or changing the diff ratio to suit the power that the engine's got. The turbocharger is sitting on a 6-boost exhaust manifold. It's got a GFB wastegate that's plumbed back down into the dump pipe before the catalytic converter, out through some mufflers and then out to the muffler at the back. That means that this thing does have a catalytic converter. It's got plenty of mufflers and it's actually a pleasure to drive. It's not drony, it's not barky. It sounds really, really nice. Engine management wise, it's not too tricky in this car. Well, it is more tricky than the twin carburetors it used to have, but it drives a whole bunch better than the carburetors, so we can afford to make it a little bit more complicated, but not as complicated as some of the builds that we've done before. It's got an Elite 2500 series ECU with a terminated RB harness. The whole harness comes from Haltech, all of the cable links to suit this particular engine, and terminated to the ECU connectors down at the passenger's foot. So it comes up through here. We've got all our injector plugs pre-terminated. These look like the Bosch 980cc injectors. The thing does run on petrol, but does have a little bit of headroom in the fuel system to run on E85 down the track if the guys want to. It uses a Walbro fuel pump in the back to pump fuel up through the factory fuel rail, through the factory fuel pressure regulator, which is vacuum referenced up here, then returns back to the factory fuel tank. So a nice simple setup using a lot of factory parts, which also kind of fits the era and the style of this build, where if this had anodized purple billet fuel rails and all that stuff, it kind of wouldn't really suit the style of the build, you know? The terminated engine harness kit comes with a couple of options for the ignition system. So if it was an earlier style RB26 engine, it would have had an external ignition module. Big box like that, the computer plugs into one side, coils plug into the other side. They're starting to get a little bit unreliable now due to the age. They're a little bit hard to find. If you do find a good one, they're expensive. The second option would have been the later series RB26 that had the ignition module built into the factory coil. That's a really good option if you can get that and if you can have that part of harness that plugs into those. But again, getting a little bit tricky to find. The most common option now is to fit a Nissan R35 coil. The plug is actually the same as the late model RB26 coil plug. So they can just plug straight in, makes for wiring nice and simple. So this has got a breakout loom here, and we call it a breakout loom because that's got a Deutsch connector sitting. You tell us what style of ignition system the car's got, then we get a harness that plugs into your coils, plugs into that breakout, and the thing's ready to run. So that makes it nice and simple with no crimping and no wiring. Being a simple setup, this engine's only got a few simple sensors. So it's got an air temperature sensor, a coolant temperature sensor. It's got a coolant temp sender that goes back to the factory gauge. It's got an electronic throttle down the front here. We've got a boost control solenoid. Other than that, there's not too many sensors. Oh, one I have forgotten, it's an RB, so it's got an oil pressure sensor, because you know what they say about RBs, you've got oil pressure till you don't. Being a turbocharged engine, we do use a MAP sensor, a manifold absolute pressure sensor. That measures the amount of vacuum or boost pressure in the inlet manifold, then feeds that information back to the engine management system so we can set up our boost control strategy, we can set up a boost cut, we map our fuel tables, we map our ignition tables, all against that manifold pressure sensor. That's a pretty important sensor to have. We've also got an oxygen sensor down this end that we use for our closed loop O2 control strategies. And we've got this super impressive check engine light. This is Datsun or Nissan engineering at its finest. This light has got a coil of wire that comes off the back of it. It's the actual check engine light before there was a light on the dash. So back in the day, if your car broke down, it was carbureted, it had points or electronic ignition or whatever the case, you would actually come out here, you would get the check engine light, wave it around until you saw what was wrong. You would then fix what was wrong on the side of the road. You would put the check engine light back in its place, get in the car without your air conditioning, and you'd be on your merry way. You know that I'm enjoying the drive in this thing when we started in Wetherell Park. We've ended up, I don't know where we've ended up, but there's cows out there, plenty of countryside. not too many project homes means that we can't be very close to Sydney. Wow. It has got some steam. And I know that that's amplified as well because yes, it's got a bit over 400 horsepower at the wheels, but it also, when it's a car like this where you're gripping the steering wheel and it's everything is clunking around and shaking around a little bit, I think it doubles the horsepower feel. And even when we go up over a crest or something like, it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. And to hold into it and rev it out in third and fourth gear, just unbelievable. Just it's amazing. It's really an exciting car to drive. Here we go. All right, come on. Ooh. No power steering, tiny steering wheel, working hard. Oh, I love it. I love it. That feel where it starts train tracking a little bit, where you've got some big marks in the road from where trucks come through here and the car starts pulling into them. It's not something that you get a feel for in brand new cars that have got all the casters set up and have got all the fancy stuff. This thing is a go-kart on the road. It's as simple as that, and it is amazing. It really is cool. Well guys, I've absolutely loved today cruising around in the Fairlady and spending a bit of time getting to know what it's like to drive an RB powered Fairlady on the street. Let me tell you, hair raising, amazing, beautiful. It's a really, really great car. To you guys, thanks very much for watching this episode. I hope you've enjoyed watching it as much as I've enjoyed making it. I told Blair he'd get his car back today, but I don't think that's happening. Catch you next time.